Well, the main influence early on was probably my father, yeah. And he went to the Art Institute in Chicago and there learned painting. He wasn't there very long, but I remember as a kid there were some of his paintings there that we could look at, we could see. Landscapes of like beach scenes, that kind of thing. And I was just in awe, you know, like how do you do that? And then I had my father show me how to draw. So we'd sit down at the kitchen table after supper. All the dishes would be cleared and the table would be out there nice and clean. And he'd bring out what he called his pencil box, but it was more than that, had all kinds of stuff in it. It was made out of cedar, and I remember that smell. So, and then he would show me things like how to draw a log cabin. Well, log cabin is difficult because you have to go one log over another log and then another log over that one. And to draw all that in perspective is a challenge. The chimney on the top roof was a challenge too, because that's angles, and you have to get the angles right in your drawing. But I just copied very carefully what he did, you know, and it was a lot of fun just to be with my dad. Now, my father and my mother were separated and divorced, so I didn't have that much time with my father. So when I was staying with them over a weekend or sometimes in the summer, being with him was real quality time. And the influence was strong, very strong. But he was also a nice guy, and he loved people. I don't think I love people. I think I hate people, but that's all right. When you're a teacher, you have to learn how to love them. But he loved people, and I loved him. Let's put it that way, simply. So he had 4 sons, and I was the youngest. Oh, now that was 1916 or so when he was there. And then he got a job as a milkman up in Evanston, which is a northern suburb of Chicago, where my mother lived as a child and grew up. And there he met my mother. And they fell in love and got married. So they had their first child a year after they got married, and that was 1919, as he was coming out of the Army. He was in the Army, drafted. And they started a family with a new house and everything in Evanston. And I didn't come along until 1934, which is quite a bit later. So I knew a different personality, you know, than my older brothers did. They knew the younger years. And they became woodworker, carpenter, liquor store manager, and sign painter. Because all of that was in the late 20s and early 30s when times were hard. So none of them went to college. Only one graduated from high school. So I was sort of like the hope of the whole family. So I went to college, and by then my mother was able to help out with the tuition. And of course I got a scholarship. That really helped a lot. My father was still alive, and I still spent some time with him. But he was getting old and senile. In my particular point of view, he was way past his prime. All right, I grew up mainly living with my mother, and she lived in northern Evanston in a very upper middle class kind of atmosphere. So the church that we went to was a traditional Catholic church with the various activities during the year. And that would have been okay. I kind of got used to going to confession sometimes on Saturday night, although I didn't want to. And then Sunday Mass was fine. And I was more interested in the Latin missal that went along with the Mass. That's when Latin was the language of the church. It no longer is, which is unfortunate, but I don't care. The missal was in Latin, so I would follow along in Latin as much as I could. And then I got into high school, and I took Latin my freshman year, and learned how to read, most of it. The problem was my mother was a very unhappy woman, and she was very strict as far as going to church and not committing a sin and praying to the saints and things of that nature that made less and less sense to me. So I finally just stopped going. And by the age of 17, I was no longer going to church, and I decided that church was not for me. Of course, it infuriated my mother, but I don't know, that's life. Each person has to proceed along their way, you know. But I learned things like confinement and conformity. I also learned guilt. You know, of course, you can be a Baptist and learn guilt, you know, but the Catholic guilt was rather strong. So I had to fight that and somehow get that out of my system as I grew older. Probably as young as age 12 is when I first had the idea that this was my occupation, was a painter. And that's because this brother who was the artist, Ken, his name is Ken, Ken gave me a painting set for Christmas, you know, a child's oil painting set. And I played with that. I was obsessed with that thing. And I remember I was only 12 years old. I used my mother's, the kitchen table, and my mother would fuss at me for leaving stuff out, and I had to put it all back after I played with it. But I also remember from those years that I would run out of white paint, and I couldn't find a way to get more white paint cheaply. Because if you go to the art supply stores, the white paint would be 35 cents a tube. You know, I mean, God, who's got 35 cents? Like this right here. Here's a quart of white paint, and it cost about $50, which is understandable now. But if I was thinking in terms of 1940s and so on, it'd be unbelievable. You know, if I thought that a quart of white would have to cost $50, then I'd go into another business. All right, I went to Grinnell College first. Then I transferred to Northwestern when I ran out of money and my mother couldn't support me anymore, but I could live at home at Northwestern. And I got another scholarship. The scholarship was interesting because it was awarded to me, but given to another kid from Chicago who came from a poorer family. And I was so angry at the school and everything. You know, I wanted to burn it down because I deserved that myself. At any rate, I was able to get through Northwestern by student loans. And that was my junior year, and I took an oil painting class from George Cohen. And this guy was so profound after being in Grinnell College for 2 years out in Iowa, and high school teachers and so on. This man was a profound philosopher. He had so many great ideas, philosophical ideas. He refused to show us how to paint, even though it was a painting class, because he felt that art was a development of ideas, of philosophies, and personal individual feelings, discoveries that one made on his own or her own. And that to me was a real breakthrough, because back in high school I had a cousin and some other friends who went to the Art Institute in Chicago, went there for college. And so I visited the Art Institute, and all I saw there was this repetitive, boring, learn by rote kind of how to draw, how to design, in other words, it was academic art. And the students were all doing academic art. And I thought to myself, there are no people here, no souls here. So I decided to go to college at Grinnell and learn a kind of a general background of knowledge. Taking philosophy and religion courses, mathematics, history, English, and the art courses. Then transferred to Northwestern and did the same thing. And there I decided that I would try illustration, medical illustration, and took developmental embryology and another course sort of leading to that program. So you could say that for one semester I was in a pre-med program. But I just didn't want to memorize parts of frogs, so let alone the human body, so I got out of that. Then I thought, well, I'll try mathematics, and got into some calculus courses, and that got so boring I had to quit that too. I just dropped out of one course altogether. Got an F in it or something, which ruined my average, but I didn't care. Because I was at Northwestern, I was painting from my soul, you know, and also playing tennis, and had girlfriends, and bowling, and when I got to be 21 I could drink beer, and I was working part-time in a restaurant as a waiter, and so it was a very full, rich life, and so mathematics and pre-med were not important to me, but drinking beer at the bowling alley was. Had a lot of fun. But Cohen, I will always remember George Cohen, and he inspired me to live a fuller, richer life than just academic illustration. That you could be more and feel more and be in touch with more profound intelligence in the world than just painting signs or something like that. So I got out of that aspect of art. He loved Shostakovich Symphony No. 5 and Symphony No. 10. So I just I rushed out and bought both symphonies and listened to them over and over and over and over again. And he liked some literature, Camus and Sartre. He would talk a little bit about that, and sort of claimed to be an existentialist himself. So I rushed over to the bookstore and got all these volumes of existential literature and sopped them up. You know, it was like a substitute for religion, and that's the kind of thing that happens when you're around 18 to 25. You form your own obsessions for a lifetime. Well, he would come in and he would say, try painting a bad painting. And then he'd kind of snicker a little bit. He had a cute kind of laugh, and he would then talk about when things like when you get to a point where you're kind of blocked. Well, let me know. I'll be down the hall in my office working. And every meeting was that way. And then we had, I think, one critique during the semester. The critique was just, well, tell me how you feel about that painting. You know? But he didn't like, he was sort of uneasy around people. But in private conversations with him, that's when I found out about Shostakovich and Camus and his philosophy of life. But he had a real quiet manner and a sense of humor that was just infectious. I mean, you just had to love the guy, you know. Mm-hmm. It's rolling, isn't it? So I can't use the word that I really want to use to describe Elson. He was arbitrary and very passionate about art history and about studio production too. And was kind of sarcastic and would put down the students. And, but yet I liked him. But he was a you-know-what anyway. And he liked me. So I started at Northwestern after the Army. I was back at Northwestern University, undergraduate, I graduated from Northwestern and went to work for the Rotary magazine on their art staff. And there I had to do these layouts and illustrations, which just killed me. And then I decided I'd go in the Army and get it over with, because the draft was on at the time. So I went in the Army for 2 years, and 2 years out of my life, and then came out and went to graduate school. And that's when I met Albert Elson. And he became my mentor, my advisor, and we worked pretty closely together with ideas and discussion of art history. And I attended all of his classes, and he was greatly admired. He was a Rodin scholar. He was an expert on Auguste Rodin. Had spent some time in France studying Rodin there, talking with the family, the Rodin family. And he wrote a book on Rodin, which was published about the same time that I got there at Indiana University. But Elson was so full of himself. I mean, that was infectious too, but that's a bad infection. That's like a staph infection. He would get up there in front of the class and kind of strut and talk about all of these cathedrals in France in French, you know, for the class. Well, nobody in the class knew what he was talking about. Anyway, he was that kind of a guy, and he apparently had some instructors, you know, when he was in graduate school, who had that same mannerism. Well, when I started teaching, finally, I got out of graduate school. I just kind of left. I was tired of it, and went to the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. I got up there, and strutted too, and expounded, and just terrible ego, which I never really lost, but at least I became aware that it was a problem and tried to take care of it. But you know, making art, this is my life, this art here is my life, and it's not all of these life history things. I mean, people do that, I mean, so what? But when you're an artist, when you're a creative person, you reach so much deeper and into meaning. The meaning becomes broader and deeper, and you know you're where you're supposed to be. And that's why all this stuff is more important than silly life history. He showed me a new way to paint, and Cohen was a surrealist, so that the space of the paintings were all very flat, like that painting back there, which is a surrealist painting. And there was no deep space to it, no room space or landscape space. And he also showed me how you can use the human figure in a fantasy way. You didn't have to paint portraits and figures plowing the fields and whatever else corny stuff, you know, that you see with figure painting, or standing nudes. I mean, he just didn't do that. He had his figures doing all kinds of interesting things in these interesting box spaces, using perspective and strange shadow lighting and that kind of thing. And that knocked me out. That really was impressive. And he was also getting ready to do shows. He had shows in Chicago at the Frumkin Gallery. And later on, when Frumkin moved to New York, he would have regular New York shows. And the same with Cohen. George Cohen was also exhibiting. Which brings to mind something about teaching. You don't go to a teacher's college or take a course in how to teach in order to become a teacher. A teacher will impart inspiration like George Cohen did. He never showed us how to paint, but he made us feel like we wanted to. And same with McGarrell, but in a much different way. If you are not a painter, then you can't teach painting. If you're not a brain doctor specialist, you can't teach brain surgery. If you are not an auto mechanic, you can't teach auto mechanics. So you have to be that person and be active in the profession in order to become a teacher of it. Well, nobody can get into the mind of another person, of course. So when he would start a painting, he might think that, well, let's do a picture of Anne on the porch. Anne was his wife. On the porch, and stick Mount Rainier in the background. And would combine things like that. And so he'd paint Anne on the porch. And I gave you one picture in there that showed a friend of ours, Barbara Owens, repairing an Oriental rug. Well, that is almost a direct swiping of McGarrel. There's Anne on the porch, you know, sitting there doing some sewing. And she had a towel wrapped around her head to dry her hair. Then sometimes it would just come intuitively, like he'd start out drawing a figure maybe running, and then put another figure in there, and then another one, and then draw a room space, and then put an arch over it. And then he got interested in James Joyce. And there are some photographs of James Joyce, I think were taken in Switzerland when he was there with some of the other avant-garde writers of this century. But it shows Joyce with a patch over his eye. And there are several photographs of him with a patch over his eye. One was playing chess, I think. So McGarrel he was fascinated by Joyce and had read Joyce. And I had read Joyce also. So he would use that as a kind of a subject to paint. But there would be that room space. Now, on back of James Joyce, who was sitting there playing chess with somebody, would be one of McGarrel's paintings in the scene, which I thought was a neat trick, you know, to put one of your own paintings into a painting. But he would invite us over to his home, and he was a collector of campy stuff. Rugs and strange corny figurines and that kind of thing. You were asking how McGarrel related to us. I remember too being in his office one day playing catch with a couple of guys outside, and McGarrel would stick his head out the window and he would play catch too. You know, had to have mitts and regular baseballs. And I remember catching a baseball that bounced off the outside wall, catching it on the short bounce. How proud I was of myself, you know. But there was a lot of horsing around like that. So that's a different way of inspiring the creative life. We saw how creative he was, and so we might do things that he did, like collect campy things, but I didn't. A job opening, there was a job opening at the University of Arkansas for someone who could teach art history and painting. And wow, there I was. I'm your man, you know. And so I decided to drop out of the art history program that I was enrolled in at Indiana University and take this job for just 1 year or so, because I was tired of being a student. That's the bottom line. I was taking all these art history courses and language courses, and when I could fit it in, I would take painting from McGarrel or some other instructor. But I wasn't doing enough studio work to really satisfy me. And the art history seemed like too remote from reality. It's much better to paint a painting than study it, you know. Even a Da Vinci or Michelangelo's ceiling or whatever. Those are beautiful things, you know, but it's not the kind of real life that I wanted to live. I had this idea that if I could teach the students how to paint like me, I would be imparting something of value to them, and more ego stuff. And I was convinced that that was the way to be a teacher, is to teach what you do, you know, which has a lot of validity to it. So I started teaching the things that I did to these students. which was McGarrel-like figures in various kind of fantasy situations. And they did quite well. I mean, they picked up on it and were painting like that for several years. And I was happy about it. And by that time, I was exhibiting in various galleries and so on. And so I thought that the world was complete. My life would go on like that forever. But life does interfere. It does come in, and had to go through a divorce, which was very destructive. Well, it wasn't a bad divorce, but divorces are always destructive. And coming out of that, I didn't really know where I wanted to go. So for a while, my teaching kind of, I think anyway, suffered there too. And but that gradually came back again, and I began to get excited about painting again. And of course, when the instructor is excited about something, the student is excited about it, and that's how you teach, So I started to get excited about being alive, being a painter, exhibiting, and that's when all of this. By the end of the '70s, mid-'70s, and the end, which is in my resume. It shows that all of a sudden I'm throwing myself into like alternative exhibitions, getting students and faculty from and independent artists to exhibit together downtown, because there weren't any contemporary galleries at the time. At the University of Arkansas, I was pretty much of a tyrant. Just make your line this way, and shade this way, and if it wasn't perfect, then they'd get a bad grade. Well, that's all coming out of me, you see. That's life according to Dick Knowles. And when I got to Memphis, the students were more sophisticated. The faculty was much more sophisticated. And there was more careful attention to the student. And then I got the idea, why not encourage the student to do what the student wants to do, rather than impose some kind of style or behavior. And it was then that I found that the teaching is harder in that sense, that you have to pay more attention to the students, how they feel, what they think, where they're coming from, in order to be a help to them as a teacher. And I've carried on that idea ever since, right up until retirement, and that is, there is a subject that we're teaching, and there are some ways that are better than others to make art, and you've got to let the student know when they're off track on that. But mainly, the student will make art in a way that is it comes from their research of the field of art. Now, there are a lot of programs where every student will look like the product of that program. They will all look like the major instructor. Now, the Art Academy is that way to a certain degree. A high school here in town, I shouldn't mention names, but a high school here in town had a very powerful influence teacher. So all the student work looks exactly like his work. Well, my approach, I tried to be just the opposite, recognizing that people are individuals and they have their own sense of meaning and their own sense of soul, if you want to put it that way. So find out what that is and help them along. Well, it was when we would have a critique and everyone got excited, or when the couple of years, about 3-4 years in a row, I was one of a couple of other people who organized these upfront exhibitions downtown. And all of these people, these artists from the Art Academy and from Memphis State and from New Orleans and from St. Louis that I knew, came into town and would spend days installing their exhibition, in the, I forgot the name of the building, but it's a very tall building on Court Square. And then that's the first 2 years. And the second 2 years was Cotton Exchange Building, where, by the way, Carol, The Cotton Exchange Building has a basement, and that's where Vincent Wren installed his clattering machine and turned off all the lights, and it was a really wonderful experience. But we had a lot of fun together working, installing things. Those are highlights of teaching. When you see the product, when you see the results of your screaming and yelling and antics and everything, and it comes out like that, when these people are really involved in making art. And that's very satisfying. There was the Art Academy that had a gallery. Memphis State had a one-room gallery on the second floor, and you couldn't find a place to park or find it at all. So it was essentially non-existent. And then occasionally there would be small galleries pop up in storefronts, in buildings in Midtown or downtown, but they would only last for 6 months and go out of business. So there was no place to exhibit for younger or contemporary artists. And we were all very much aware of that. My friends on the faculty and the graduate students and so on. And so two of my graduate students, one of them really, Sue Miller, knew the manager of not the Cotton Exchange Building, but the other building, the tall building.
The Sterrick.
What?
Sterrick. Is it the Sterrick building?
Sterrick building, yeah, that's it. And the two of them got together and got another graduate student involved in it named George Souders. And the three of them decided to let us put up an exhibition, install an exhibition in the top floor of the Sterrick building. It had been some kind of a health clinic or something. So when we got up there, we found all these tubes and needles and clamps and health posters and all kinds of stuff. We had to take out a lot of that. And so we spent, I don't know, maybe a whole month transforming the top floor into an art gallery. And that went for 2 years in a row. Now, and along with that, I had published the Untitled magazine. It wasn't much. It was newsprint with a lot of illustrations in it, and it ran about 12 to 16 pages. Nice big size copy. But that ran along with the upfront shows, and I went to a lawyer here in town to get some help on how to establish all this and make it legal. And he said, well, the first thing you do is to form an organization. So I got a couple of friends, and one is treasurer and one is secretary, and I was president, of course. And we called it the Mid-South Independent Artists Association. And it was from that we did these other activities, like the Mid-South Independent Artists was sponsoring these other activities. It was not school sponsored, and I made sure that there was no help from any school, the academy or art department at Memphis, or anything at all. That we were independent artists out there in the community. That point was very, very important to me, and I think to the other artists as well. All right, I was doing some landscapes and around 1982 or 3, and I got a phone call from a gallery director up in northern Illinois, in Rockford, Illinois, with whom I had had a show, I don't know, 5 or 10 years before that. And she said, Dick, can you illustrate for me the poems? Oh, again, names. I'm bad with names. These are romantic love poems by a contemporary, really small.
Robert Graves.
Who?
Robert Graves.
Robert Graves, yeah. So I thought that's an interesting challenge. I haven't done the figure in a few years. Why not try that? So I got a copy of Robert Graves and his poetry. And the poetry, it was the sappiest, romantic mush that I've ever read by a contemporary human being. And she, the gallery owner, her name was Pat Sneed. Pat was just gushing about what's his name?
Graves.
Yeah, Robert Graves. I'm glad you're with us, Carol. She gushed over Robert Graves. She had met the man in New York, and he gave her his signature or something like that. And I think she was in love with him, you know. So she had this exhibition of painters illustrating Robert Graves. Well, I started working on it. My idea was to paint women. It's all about women and being in love with women. So I started painting women in ordinary circumstances, doing ordinary things, like being in the kitchen or writing something at a desk, which is, I showed you one painting, or I think it's in there. It's called the Poetess. That's one we were calling female poetesses. And then I thought, well, let's try the swimming pool. And when I looked down, a couple of friends and I went to a swimming pool at one apartment complex. And when I saw her underwater and what the top of the waves were doing to the figure underwater, I was astonished. The figure was all broken up because of the waves, because of the refraction of the light. And you had to have a strong light, external light like the sun or another lamp at night. We tried some night pictures too. And that led to this whole series of figures in water. And I felt a real close association with that because I love to swim, I love the water, and I like the idea of the human being being fractured like that in the medium of water, because it suggests something transcendent or spiritual or something like that, or somebody drowning, but I didn't think of that. So I tried different variations of that. I did about 15 or 20. And a New York art critic and producer was in town as a visiting artist, and he saw the work. And he went back to New York, and someone from Nashville asked him to pick 10 artists from Tennessee, and he picked me as one of the 10. And this was in a show that went to all the major museums in Tennessee. And I came back to Memphis, I think was the last venue, but I had about 5 paintings in that show, along with 9 other people. So it was kind of I was kind of proud of that. Another good ego trip. But that's what those figures in water are all about. Using the figure is very tricky. You look at artists look at other art and quite often imitate other artists. Well, the way that the figure had been used in older art was, I think, kind of corny. Some of it erotic, which, you know, instead of saying the naked woman is beautiful, when we look at it today, we think, he was a horny guy, you know, who painted that. It's not beauty anymore, it's eroticism. I won't call it pornography because some of it is very beautiful painting. Rubens and Titian, Ingres, Manet, and others all use the human figure. Manet and the Impressionists, whenever they did do the figure, which is unusual except for Degas, the figure was always doing something normal, natural, instead of posing in a harem. You know, so if you're going to do the human figure, you can make them into harem girls, and they were always girls, never men. Or have them doing something natural, which is what I kind of looked for and tried. There are a couple of paintings, I think you have one image in the folder there, that shows a nude on a stool in a sculptor's studio. Well, that's what nudes do. They pose in a class or a studio. And that was okay, use the nude that way. And so it's obviously a model of some kind, and not someone who was frolicking through the daisies and, in the woods. So the human figure is interesting also because if you distort the figure, you get some weird effects. And it's a human, but the human has an animal head, or it has a strange distorted body, and it is running through strange spaces, and so you just kind of let your imagination go, and just do what seems to come to you as you're painting, using the figure instead of using the figure in a traditional way. Well, I had flown, by that time I had taken trips where you're in an airplane, you look down. And I was always impressed by the landscape, the scene from up above. And I guess one day I was doing an abstract painting where there was nothing in the painting, no figures, no space. It's just marks and kind of symbol-like forms. And I tried to think of something to paint, and I started thinking about what I had seen from aircraft, from flights over. And started to paint from memory what I had seen, but not exactly. And then gave that up and just started to invent my own Earth surface. And that's what started that. Then my daughter Amy went to University of Wyoming, and she sent me back these workbooks and magazines and other things that had a lot of satellite views in them. And she was a major in geology. And I used some of those to sort of remind me of aerial views. Now back here on this wall, which you probably can't photograph very well, I've collected from the NASA website, I've collected views of various countries or parts of the world that are very abstract. And they are as abstract as, say, the red painting there, or this painting on the floor, where there's very little traditional organization or color relationship. I wanted to invent things just as startling and new as nature herself does, and show how nature herself moves parts of the earth against each other, like subduction and craters and salt lakes and that kind of thing, and how these all are created in pretty much unpredictable ways, unless you're a geologist and can trace all of the forces in action. But the forces are so complex that I tried to not make art that is art that's pretty, or art that is a painting that is well balanced and neat and understandable, a painting with balanced color and any kind of a traditional painting. And I tried to come up with unpredictable things. Now, after a while, of course, my style will show through. Anybody's style is going to show through. So people were saying, "Oh, looks like a Dick Knowles," So I couldn't get down to where I wanted to with the nature and natural movement, natural forms, but I got pretty close. And that one photograph up there that has a white spot with a black center, that one up there is so unpredictable, yet it could be one of my paintings, one of my better paintings, like the one on the floor. If somebody says, "Well, that's not realistic, I don't like abstract art," I can point to the view here of some part of the Russian steppes or whatever it's from, say, "Look at that." So much for aerial views. I love them because especially the big ones, 64, 69 inches, or even I've done 6 feet by 7 feet, and those were for the Harrah's commission. Well, anyway, you get into the painting. Your whole body gets in there, and I lay the painting down horizontally, and then kind of flush water or paint or color into that water, and then watch it do things. Like this. I started this yesterday. And it's just water that I've poured this color into. Now this is the first stage. You getting that okay? This is how I begin, and then develop that by overlays of things of different colors. But it's sort of coming up from the bottom and the right. It's not placed right in the center. It's not a bisymmetrical composition. It's just not like art, or ordinary art. Of course, that's, you're going to make art no matter what you do, if you're using color and canvas surface. The other idea I had with the about in the mid '80s, when I gave up the figures in water and started doing more aerial views, I read a book by again, names, and I'm going. No, that was earlier. Anyway, about complexity, chaos. A book on chaos, and I think he wrote it in 1984, but I didn't read it until '87 or '88. And in there, he discusses various kinds of ways that mathematics creates these interesting, unpredictable forms and shapes. Glick. Glick is the guy's name, G-L-E-I-C-K. Then I thought, why not do nature that way, where nature is essentially chaotic. That means unpredictable and doesn't follow any rules. Of course, nature does, but I thought I would try this approach to landscape and aerial view, especially aerial view. So I did, and I'm still working on that idea. It started about 1988, 89, and although I did landscapes, aerial views before then, now I was doing aerial views where I intentionally tried to do things that were unpredictable. Feeling that chaos, or at least complexity, is more realistic than what an artist can do in a traditional way. Because it is closer to what paint does and what the earth does. The earth does not look like a Gainsborough or a Turner or even a Claude Monet. The earth looks a lot different from those. So these are people who are manipulating the earth according to their own image of the earth. Why not make some earth in a painting that has not been manipulated, where mankind, the man or woman, gives up controlling earth, like you do in a painting like Turner would do, or not Gainsborough, but the Englishman whose landscapes I think are so Constable, really gorgeous landscapes, just beautiful things. But yet here's Constable fashioning earth according to his own standard. So I wanted to get away from that. The abstract does mean something to me, always means something, and when it doesn't, I know it, and I'll keep working on the painting until something happens, it comes alive. And it comes alive in, well, this may not be the best example, but when different forms come at each other or fall into each other or pop out of the abstraction, then that's sort of like the way life is. And I feel the life in that drawing. Now other drawings would be not so much full of life and would be boring, and I'd just simply paint over them or throw them out. I love music. I hate to dance, although a girlfriend in college insisted that I learn how to dance. So she taught me, but I quickly forgot it when we broke up. And then theater, I was a child actor. and love that. Now that doesn't have much to do with painting, but music does. I get some contemporary avant-garde kinds of music, very formless kinds of music, quartets, especially chamber music. I love chamber music. Or it might be something traditional, and I discover something in it. Some Haydn, for example. I discovered Haydn's quartets not too long ago. Haydn before that was very boring to me. I didn't like Haydn. Beethoven, there's some parts of Beethoven that are absolutely transcendental. I mean, boy, I want to paint when I hear it, you know. So I have it playing when I'm working on something. No, music is very, very important. It's sort of like part of my life. Now, I took piano lessons when I was a kid, but we couldn't have a piano in the house. And I took ukulele lessons from my brother because he played the ukulele. But I mean, who cares about a ukulele? But I just never got back to playing an instrument. But I just loved to listen to it. Pretty much, I've restricted myself to classical, traditional, and some 20th century modern, like Bartók, and then some composers who are working right now. But it's classical. I don't care much for jazz. I enjoy some bluegrass occasionally, and I used to like what was called modern jazz at the time, and that was back in the 50s. Dave Brubeck, for example. I enjoyed that, and I have since tried buying a couple of albums and really trying to understand it and understand why people liked it. You know, it's baffling. It's so boring. And so I was talking to Larry Jason one day, and he said, well, your classical music is the most boring thing I've ever heard, because he's a jazz fancier. So we had some fun talking about that. But jazz is okay, or various forms of contemporary popular music, but it's not something I can listen to. Like the Beethoven, one of Beethoven's piano sonatas, number 10, or Opus 106, has some passages in it that blow me away, and it's where Beethoven will try a theme, and this is a theme and variations part of the sonata. He'll try a theme, and then he'll try a variation on that theme, and then he'll stop abruptly, as if to say, no, that's not it. And they go on to the same theme, but trying to play it or compose it a different way. And it just stops abruptly again. Like, no, that's not it either. And they go on to another one. And meanwhile, I'm just getting more and more excited about it, creating, you know, things and changing things around, and like you know, like an artist does, or any artist will, you know, of any medium. They just love their different variations and arrangements of things. And other times, like the Appassionata Sonata, Beethoven, it just makes you want to explode with excitement when you listen to it. And that carries over into the painting. Chicago is known for its monster school. And that started right after the Second World War, when Jean Dubuffet visited Chicago and stayed there and taught at the Art Institute, and did work in Chicago, and influenced all the young artists there. And if you know Dubuffet, it's monstrous things that he would assemble, put together. And all the young artists there started doing Dubuffet monsters. And then that gradually evolved into paintings that looked like other surrealist artists. Dubuffet at that time was no longer a surrealist, but the monster school image was certainly surrealism. So that's the Chicago Monster School, and as far as I know, it's still fairly viable. Although today there's more of a uniform style of art all over the world, the Western world, Japan, the United States, all the artists making art the same way. So we've lost a sense of regional style as style, and lost a sense of individual inventions. Where the avant-garde no longer exists. There is no avant-garde because everybody's making art the same way. And the art might be installation art with junk piled up or something. It might be some kind of process art where the artist pretends like she's a repairwoman. It might be photographic art, filmmaking, painting, traditional sculpture, or mechanical sculpture of some kind, motion art. So everybody is all these things are being taught in all the art schools all over the world, and so what you're seeing in the galleries and the art magazines is it's just you can't tell one from another. It's really interesting. Now I believe in individual artist touch. I want to be able to look at a work of art and say, that's a Smith and that's a Johnson, and say, and boy, I really see a personal point of view coming through. It's not just academic, all the same art. You don't see that very often. Of course, you never did. I think that even 30, 40, 50 years ago, there would be a pervasive style and everybody would be imitating it. But now we just have more styles to imitate.
Well, what about when you went to Greece?
Mm-hmm.
What is it about Greek culture and Greek art that you love?
Well, I went there for the climate, the landscape, the islands, the sea, which has nothing to do with any culture at all. It has more to do with the landscape. And then the other thing is and ancient art. I went there for that reason too. So again, it's not the contemporary culture. Again, I'm not in the contemporary culture interacting with Greek people. Now, I've been back there a couple of times more. So more recently, I've gotten to know Greek people better, which seems to be a very common situation among tourists. They want to be isolated from the people themselves. And but the ancient art in Athens at their anthropological museum, or in Delphi, or in Olympia, with their museums full of all this famous Greek art, is to me very exciting, very thrilling. In graduate school, going back, I was asked to teach a course in Greek art because I was the ancient art specialist quit at the last minute, and somebody had to teach the course, and I was recommended. All right, so I taught that summer, and again in the fall, so I got to know ancient art so very, very intimately, and get a real emotional feeling for it, and a certain classical reserve that I just loved, and in their images. And so when I finally got to Greece, I could see all this stuff in the original, and that's what I wanted to do. That's why I wanted to go to Greece. But I had friends there too, so I did a lot of swimming, and again drinking a lot of, not whiskey, but a lot of wine. Mavro, that was my favorite. We'd sit out on the patio outside a restaurant and get served this red wine and a small red fish, about this big, French fries, and Greek salad, and talk and drink wine and watch the yachts that were moored nearby, bobbing in the water. And so we did that in the village, and then we go back to the villa, which is about a 20-minute walk back up on the other side of the island. Now that was wonderful, absolutely. I mean, I knew it was wonderful while it was going on, and I remembered how wonderful it was, and even today I remember how wonderful it was. But that is where I got the idea of a classical figure rather than a specific portrait of somebody, or a cartoon or an exaggeration. There was one painting called She Plays Bach in the Morning. It was purchased out of a show in Kansas City, so I can't show you the original. But it has a very classic profile in it. And then, well, that one up there has a classic profile at the top. So it isn't just an accidental cartoon-like figure or a self-portrait like most artists do self-portraits when they do a figure or a face that is not from a model. They'll do a self-portrait. It's unconscious, but that one isn't. So it's based on Greek sculpture. All right, in 1994, in July, in the Sunday paper, was an article about how the virgin wilderness has been cut down east of the Mississippi. There's no more wilderness areas east of the Mississippi. And I hadn't thought about it much. And I was really alarmed because I've always loved being outdoors. I've loved trees and the idea of the North Woods. My father used to talk about the North Woods all the time and how he wanted to go back there. And drawing the cabin, you see, was part of the North Woods experience. So I decided to find some wilderness area. Start with Tennessee and the Smoky Mountains. And so I wrote a grant, and we got the grant from the university for exploring the Smoky Mountains and areas there, plus anything else we might find within a day's drive. And we took some of the trails in the Smoky Mountains, and sure enough, it was a lot different looking, and the feeling was wholly different than it was in a cut forest. Most of the forests that we see now are all second, third cutting, fourth cutting, and are very boring. But these original growth forests are, wow, very exciting, kind of romantic, but who cares? And we took a trail called, well, there was an oak trail, but the trail I'm thinking of is Laurel Trail. And it starts out with a tar trail that winds up and around the side of the mountain that gets you up to a waterfall called Laurel Falls. And all of that is pretty touristy. But it was kind of fun. I took my shirt off, and this was in April, and there was enough sunlight and heat, and I walked into the falls, and it was a lot of fun. But got dressed again, and then went beyond the falls and found genuine wilderness area. Hemlock trees, you know, bigger around than you can possibly get your arms around, going up straight and tall, and this mysterious, moody, empty subcanopy areas around between these trees. And I kept on going up and up. Well, matter of fact, that's a view from Laurel Falls Trail up the mountain beyond Laurel Falls. And we were getting toward sundown. You can see the sun behind a tree on the left-hand side, silhouetting the tree. And then a lot of dead trees lying around. So Larry took the photograph, and I did some drawings of that scene. And then Larry had the photographs transferred, the images transferred to a certain kind of thin canvas that was light sensitive, and enlarged it onto that canvas. And then gave the canvases to me, and then I painted over his photograph. And I think I made 6 of them altogether. Now I've got 3, and Larry's got 3. But he and I were both interested in the wilderness, the wildness of nature. The forest, if you get into a wilderness area that's more or less a virgin forest, has not been cut, has not been replanted, Then you get into very, very ancient configurations of vines and branches and trees and some that can get very, very large, like some of the areas of the Smoky Mountains have these huge trees. They're different kinds, like cedar and so on, and empty undergrowth. See empty subcanopy areas that have very little vegetation in them, and things like nurse logs that fall, and sometimes trees grow up out of the nurse log, and they're all in a row because they're growing up out of the log. But it was a profusion of vines and branches and really smaller trees that I saw as being very, very chaotic and complex, and I certainly didn't want to sit there and draw every branch and every leaf myself, and thinking that this is how nature really behaves, and it is so absolutely beautiful. My father had lived and worked in Alaska, in Skagway for a while, and then into the Yukon for a while. And he was up there during the 1898 to 1912 gold rush. He was much older than a father normally is. You know, I was the last. No, I wasn't the last either. He got married a second time and had 3 more kids. He was and Vancouver. He lived in Vancouver for a while. As a matter of fact, played the clarinet for some Vancouver Symphony Orchestra group, not officially the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, but something similar to it. And I wanted to go back to Vancouver and explore my dad's world when he was a youth, and find virgin forests and so on. So we went back up there and kind of looked around Vancouver, but went to Vancouver Island, which is just full of original growth stuff, wilderness stuff, along what they call the Pacific Rim, and there are a lot of parks there, Pacific Rim Park, and that run for miles along the beachfront. But getting to the beach, you have to go through all this wilderness landscape. And it is so kind of spooky that you can't see the bottom, you can't see the ground. You have to walk on these wooden steps that the rangers had built out there so you get through those woods. And you look down and you see a lot of water pools and different foliage down below. And then up above you see all this tangled foliage. And then we did that, and then we went north along the Pacific to a little fishing village that had turned in much to a tourist area, and took a boat from there to an island, and the boat let us off and said it'll be back in an hour to pick us up. So we took the trail through the island and came across a 1,200-year-old cedar tree. And it was so old that it had other trees growing out of it, and different levels where there's different kinds of foliage as you go up. Really loved that. I took some pictures of Carol trying to get her arms around it. You know, of course you can't, because the trunk is as big as this room at that point. But Carol and I continued to find places to explore, like Utah. I started in 1994 with this newspaper article, and we just got more and more interested in it in the 90s until I retired in 99 and got a friend of mine from upstate New York to go with us. The 3 of us then traveled up to New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Nova Scotia, places like that, camping and sketching the wilderness areas up there. But we didn't come across any true wilderness. There are many places in the Northwest that are true wilderness. And one of the most exciting, well, there's the redwood forest, of course. But one of the most exciting beyond the redwoods is around the bottom of Mount Rainier. There's several old growth areas there. And the trails are like walking through a Disney World forest. Really just romantic, yeah, but very exciting. And that kind of petered out because then Carol and I went to the Southwest, and we took a little casita for 1 month in March, April. And from that casita, every day we'd get in the car and go into either the Jemez Mountains or the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, or farther straight up north, and every day explore the trails and the mountain heights and the parks where there wouldn't be anybody around, and had a good time that way. But again, not real true virgin forest, but still just god awful beautiful, you know. And then the deserts and the deserts of New Mexico. This was in Santa Fe that we rented the casita. But desert is just as interesting, and you can say that, well, it too is wilderness, especially if it doesn't have roads and buildings built into it and earth graders and things like that, interrupting the rocks and the soil. And so we had that experience in Canyonlands, and had some of that experience in the deserts of New Mexico as well. And we go out and take a hike into the desert or camp out. We did that for 2 nights, southern Utah. And the desert has its own character that is very often unpredictable, especially where there's a lot of erosion, as there is in the Canyonlands. Canyonlands extends over to the Colorado River, quite a distance across the state. So it has a lot of eroded rock formations, and it's always an eye-opener every time you turn the corner. You know, in the desert, you got something new to look at.